Commander Xylith of the Vaxan Empire stood before the massive holographic display in the war room of their flagship, the Dominion's Edge. The blueskin alien's forearms gestured dramatically as he addressed the council of military leaders gathered around the crystalline table. The humans have rejected our final ultimatum, Xylith announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had conquered 17 star systems. They refuse to surrender their colony worlds and submit to imperial rule. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembled commanders. Elder Corax, the oldest among them, slowly rose from his seat. His ancient eyes, clouded with age but sharp with wisdom, fixed on the young commander. Commander Xylith, the elder's voice was barely above a whisper, but it silenced the room completely. I must remind you of the old warnings. My grandfather fought in the Terran contact wars 300 cycles ago. The stories passed down through our families. Stories, Xylith interrupted with a dismissive wave of his primary arm. Old tales meant to frighten children. Elder Corax, with respect, those were different times. We are not the same Vaxan Empire that stumbled upon Earth centuries ago. We are stronger, more advanced, more prepared. Elder Corax's weathered face creased with concern. You do not understand, young one. The warnings were not about our weakness then, but about their strength now. Humanity is not like other species. They adapt. They evolve. They become more dangerous with each passing generation. The other commanders exchanged glances. Most of them had heard fragments of the old stories, but few believed them to be anything more than exaggerated tales of ancient defeats. The modern Vaxan Empire was a superpower that stretched across multiple galaxies. Their technology was unmatched, their military unstoppable. Elder, Commander Xylith said, his tone becoming more respectful but no less determined, I have studied the human colonies extensively. Yes, they have expanded since first contact, but they remain a young species. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. Their ships are crude mental constructs while ours harness the power of quantum crystalline matrices. Their weapons are projectile-based kinetics, added Subcommander Vrex, consulting his data tablet. We have energy shields that can deflect their attacks with ease. Their fastest ships take months to travel between star systems while our fold space technology allows instantaneous movement across the galaxy. Elder Corax shook his head slowly. You focus on their technology, but that was never their true weapon. It was never their ships or their guns that made them dangerous. Then, what? Xylith demanded. What could possibly make a species of hairless bipeds a threat to the might of the Vaxan Empire? The old elder was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he recalled the stories his grandfather had told him as a young hatchling. Their refusal to accept defeat. Their ability to find strength in hopelessness. Their way of turning every loss into a lesson, every defeat into motivation for revenge. Superstition, muttered Subcommander Vrex under his breath, but loud enough for others to hear. Several younger officers nodded in agreement. Elder Corax heard the comment but did not respond directly. Instead, he activated a small personal holoprojector and displayed an image that made several commanders lean back in surprise. It showed a barren, cratered world with a single monument standing amid the destruction. This is Kepler 442b, the elder said quietly. It was once home to the Zephyrian Confederacy. 12 billion souls lived on this world. They made the same mistake you are about to make. The image zoomed in on the monument. The inscription was in multiple languages, but the Vaxan translation was clear. Here lies a civilization that underestimated humanity's resolve. The Zephyrians had technology superior to the humans, Elder Corax continued. They had a fleet twice the size of Earth's navy. They conquered the outer human colonies with ease and demanded total surrender. The humans refused. And? Xylith asked, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. The war lasted 3 years. In the end, the humans developed new weapons, new tactics, new technologies that shouldn't have been possible with their resources. They didn't just defeat the Zephyrians. They made sure no trace of their civilization could ever threaten anyone again. Subcommander Vrex scoffed. With respect, Elder, that sounds like human propaganda. No species could advance their technology so rapidly, especially under the pressure of warfare. That is exactly what makes them dangerous, Elder Corax replied. What other species sees as impossible pressure, humans see as motivation. What we see as a reason to surrender, they see as a reason to fight harder.
The room fell silent as the implications sank in.
Finally, Commander Xylith spoke, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty for the first time. Even if your stories contain some truth, Elder, we cannot show weakness now. The Empire's reputation depends on our response to human defiance. Other species are watching. If we back down from a confrontation with humans, it will be seen as a sign that the Vaxan Empire can be challenged.
And if we proceed, Elder Corax said sadly, it may be the last challenge the Vaxan Empire ever faces.
The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. The younger commanders outnumbered the elder voices, and political pressure from the imperial capital demanded action. The human colonies had refused to submit, and the Empire's honor was at stake. As the meeting concluded and orders were given to prepare the invasion fleet, Elder Corax made one final attempt to change their course. Commander Xylith, he called out as the war room began to empty. If you will not listen to the warnings of the past, at least heed this advice: do not underestimate their capacity for sacrifice. Humans will die for ideas that other species abandon when faced with certain death. They will sacrifice their own lives to ensure their children can continue the fight. Xylith paused at the doorway. Elder, your concern is noted, but our intelligence reports are clear. The human colonies are poorly defended. Their main fleet is spread thin across dozens of systems. This will be over quickly. That is what the Zephyrians thought, Elder Corax replied quietly. That is what they all thought. 3 days later, the Vaxan invasion fleet emerged from foldspace at the edge of the Kepler 438 system. The force was impressive by any standard: 200 heavy cruisers, 50 dreadnought-class battleships, and the massive command vessel Dominion's Edge. Supporting them were countless smaller ships, fighters, and orbital bombardment platforms. The human colony of New Terran was home to nearly 15 million people. Intelligence reports suggested it was defended by a small garrison fleet of perhaps 20 ships and a handful of orbital defense platforms.
The battle should have been over in hours. Commander Xylith stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his forces moved into attack formation.
The human colony world spun peacefully before them, its blue-green surface unmarked by the technology of war.
Tactical analysis complete, Commander, reported his sensors officer. We detect 18 human vessels in defensive positions around the colony.
No significant orbital fortifications beyond basic traffic control stations.
Exactly as predicted, Xylith said with satisfaction. Open a channel to the colony.
The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of a middle-aged human woman in a simple blue uniform. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as she looked directly into the camera.
I am Governor Sarah Chen of New Terran Colony, she said without preamble.
I assume you're here to demand our surrender. Xylith was momentarily taken aback by her directness. I am Commander Xylith of the Vaxan Empire. You have 1 hour to evacuate your population to the planet's surface and surrender your defensive fleet. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your colony. Governor Chen smiled, and something in that expression sent an unexpected chill down Xylith's spine. Commander, I need to ask you a question. Did anyone in your command structure try to warn you about fighting humans? The question caught Xylith completely off guard. What relevance does that have? Because, Governor Chen continued, someone should have told you that we don't surrender.
We don't back down.
And, we especially don't abandon our children to alien invaders who think they can threaten our families. Governor, Xylith said, trying to regain his composure, you have 18 ships against our force of over 200.
Your resistance is meaningless.
You're right about the numbers, she agreed. But, you're wrong about the resistance being meaningless. You see, Commander, you're about to learn something that apparently your elders failed to teach you.
When you threaten human children, you don't get our surrender.
You get our absolute, uncompromising, and creative fury. Before Xylith could respond, his tactical officer called out urgently.
Commander! We're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. Impossible, Xylith snapped. Intelligence reports indicated no significant military installations on the surface.
The signatures are coming from civilian areas, the tactical officer reported, his voice rising with confusion. Residential districts, schools, manufacturing centers.
It's like the entire planet is powering up for war. On the screen, Governor Chen's smile widened. Did your intelligence reports mention that New Terran is home to the finest engineering college outside the Sol system? Or that our manufacturing base includes 17 orbital shipyards disguised as asteroid mining operations? Xyloth's blood ran cold as understanding began to dawn. You're bluffing. No civilian population could pose a threat to a military fleet of this size. Commander, Governor Chen said quietly, you're about to discover that there's no such thing as a civilian population when human children are threatened.
There are only humans who haven't been pushed far enough to fight yet.
Alarms began blaring throughout the Vaxen fleet as sensors detected massive launches from the planet's surface. What appeared on their screens defied all tactical understanding.
Hundreds of missiles and fighters were emerging from what their intelligence had identified as shopping centers, apartment buildings, and recreational facilities.
How is this possible?
Xyloth demanded of his staff. His intelligence officer, frantically consulting multiple data sources, looked up with bewilderment.
Commander, it appears the entire colony was constructed as a distributed military installation.
Every building, every structure was designed to serve dual civilian and military purposes.
The humans have been preparing for this invasion for decades. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation.
As the first wave of human fighters closed with the Vaxen fleet, it became clear that these weren't standard military vessels. They were modified civilian craft, piloted by people who had no business being in space combat.
Commander, his communications officer called out. We're intercepting transmissions from the attacking craft. These aren't military pilots.
The voice identifications suggest teachers, engineers, students, even teenagers. Xyloth watched in growing horror as his sophisticated military fleet came under attack from what could only be described as an entire civilization that had mobilized for war in a matter of hours. The human fighters moved with tactics he'd never seen before, using their intimate knowledge of their own system to set ambushes in asteroid fields and behind gas giant moons.
Sir, his weapons officer reported, their attack patterns don't match any known military doctrine. They're improvising, adapting their tactics in real time based on our responses. Return fire. Xyloth ordered. Destroy them.
But, as Vaxen energy beams lanced out toward the human fighters, another shock awaited them.
The human craft didn't try to avoid the attacks. Instead, they used their destruction as weapons, ramming damaged fighters into Vaxen ships or detonating their own engines to create devastating explosions that caught nearby enemies. They're using suicide tactics, Sub-Commander Vrex reported with disbelief.
They're deliberately sacrificing themselves to take out our ships. On the communication screen, Governor Chen watched the battle with the same calm expression she'd worn throughout their conversation.
Commander, you should know that every person in that attack wave volunteered. We didn't order anyone to fight.
We simply announced that our children were threatened, and asked who was willing to defend them. Xyloth watched as another group of human fighters, these ones clearly piloted by children based on the intercepted communications, managed to cripple one of his heavy cruisers through a coordinated attack that showed tactical brilliance far beyond their years.
This is madness, he whispered.
No, Governor Chen corrected.
This is what happens when you threaten human families. And, Commander, this is just the beginning.
What you're seeing now is our colony's immediate response.
Wait until word of your attack reaches Earth.
As if summoned by her words, Xyloth's long-range sensors began detecting new arrivals at the edge of the system. Ships were emerging from fold space jumps, but these weren't the crude human vessels his intelligence had described. These were sleek, advanced warships that moved with predatory grace.
Where did those ships come from? He demanded.
His sensors officer's voice was barely steady.
Commander, they appear to be human vessels, but the technology readings don't match any known human capabilities.
These ships are using power sources and propulsion systems that shouldn't exist.
Governor Chen's expression finally changed, showing something that might have been pity. Commander, did you really think that in the 300 years since your people first encountered us, we would just stay the same? Did you think we wouldn't learn from every battle, every defeat, every hard-won victory?
The new human ships moved with impossible speed, covering distances that should have taken hours in mere minutes. As they closed with the Vaxen fleet, it became clear that humanity had not spent the centuries since first contact in peaceful development. Commander, his tactical officer reported with growing panic, the new human vessels are using weapons technology that appears to be quantum-based.
They're penetrating our shields as if they don't exist. Xyloth realized with growing horror that Elder Corax had been right.
They weren't facing the same humanity that his ancestors had encountered centuries ago. They were facing a species that had spent 300 years preparing for this exact moment. And, as the first human quantum weapons began tearing through his fleet's defenses like they were made of paper, Commander Xylith finally understood what the Elder had been trying to tell him.
The warnings hadn't been about humanity's strength in the past.
They had been about humanity's inevitable evolution into something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. The quantum weapons tore through the Vaxxan fleet's energy shields like they were made of tissue paper. Commander Xylith watched in growing horror as his heavy cruiser Vengeance's strike simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but somehow unraveled at the molecular level. Defensive pattern Kappa, he screamed into his communicator. All ships implement evasive maneuvers. But the human ships moved like nothing he had ever seen. They didn't follow predictable flight paths or standard tactical formations. Instead, they flowed through space like living creatures, adapting their approach based on each Vaxxan ship's individual defensive patterns. "Commander," his communications officer called out, his voice cracking with stress, "we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel."
"Put it through," Xylith ordered, though every instinct told him he didn't want to hear what they had to say. The face that appeared on his screen was unlike any human he had seen before. The man appeared to be in his 40s, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. But it wasn't his appearance that chilled Xylith to the bone. It was the complete absence of anger or hatred in his expression. This human looked at the Vaxxan fleet with the same detached professionalism a surgeon might show when removing a cancer. "I am Admiral Marcus Webb of the Human Defense Initiative," the man said calmly. "Commander Xylith, I am required to inform you that your attack on New Terran has triggered Protocol 7 of the Terran Defense Compact."
"I don't know what that means," Xylith replied, though his voice was barely steady. "It means," Admiral Webb continued, "that this is no longer a local conflict.
When you chose to attack a human colony, you declared war on all of humanity.
Every human world, every human ship, every human citizen in the galaxy is now mobilizing to respond to your aggression."
Xylith's tactical displays were painting an increasingly grim picture.
The 23 human ships that had arrived were systematically dismantling his fleet of over 200 vessels. Their weapons didn't just destroy Vaxxan ships, they seemed to learn from each engagement, becoming more effective with every shot fired. "This is impossible," Sub-Commander Vrex whispered from his position at the tactical station. "Their weapons are adapting in real time.
Each shot is more effective than the last." Admiral Webb must have heard the comment through their open communication channel.
"Sub-Commander, you're witnessing the practical application of 3 centuries of human technological development. Every weapon we fire contains an artificial intelligence capable of analyzing and countering defensive measures."
"Artificial intelligence?" Xylith gasped. "The creation of artificial life is forbidden by every civilized species in the galaxy."
"Yes," Admiral Webb agreed.
"We know.
That's one of the many advantages of being considered an uncivilized species by the galactic community. While other races limited their development to avoid offending political sensibilities, we focused on practical solutions to survival." Another Vaxxan ship vanished from Xylith's tactical display, this one his heavy assault carrier Domination's Fist.
3,000 crew members simply gone in an instant. "You're committing genocide," Xylith accused. Admiral Webb's expression didn't change.
"Commander, genocide is the systematic extermination of an entire people based on their species, culture, or beliefs. What you're experiencing is the natural consequence of threatening human civilians. If you want this to stop, order your fleet to withdraw immediately."
"The Empire does not retreat,"
Xylith declared, though the conviction in his voice was wavering. "Then, the Empire dies today," Admiral Webb replied matter-of-factly.
"Commander, I want you to understand something about human military doctrine. We don't fight wars to win territory or resources. We fight wars to ensure that anyone who threatens our families never has the opportunity to do so again." As if to emphasize his point, the human ships suddenly changed their attack pattern. Instead of focusing their fire on the largest Vaxxan vessels, they began systematically targeting the fleet's support ships. Supply vessels, communication relays, medical frigates, every ship that kept the fleet operational became a priority target. "They're not trying to defeat us quickly," Xylith realized with growing dread. "They're cutting off our ability to retreat." His navigation officer confirmed his fears. "Commander, they've destroyed all of our fold space-capable ships. We can't jump to hyperspace." And, his communications officer added, "They've deployed some kind of jamming field."
We can't send word back to Imperial Command about what's happening here.
Admiral Webb nodded as if he could hear their private conversations. Standard human tactical doctrine, Commander. We call it total engagement.
When a hostile force threatens civilian populations, we ensure that every ship and every crew member involved faces the consequences of that decision. Xyloth's hands were shaking as he gripped his command console. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically to find some solution, some escape from the nightmare they had stumbled into. But the human ships continued their methodical destruction of everything the Vaxan Empire had sent to conquer New Terran. Admiral Webb, Xyloth said, his voice barely above a whisper, surely we can negotiate some kind of settlement. The Empire can offer compensation for any damages. Commander, Admiral Webb interrupted, 300 years ago, your people had the opportunity to establish peaceful relations with humanity. Instead, you chose to treat us as a lesser species to be conquered or enslaved. That was your choice. This is the consequence of that choice. On Xyloth's tactical display, another development was occurring that defied all military logic. The human fighters that had launched from New Terran's surface were not retreating to the safety of the planet's atmosphere. Instead, they were pursuing damaged Vaxan ships, working in coordination with Admiral Webb's fleet to ensure that no enemy vessel escaped. Sir, his weapons officer reported, the colonial fighters are using their ships as guided missiles. They're ramming our vessels and detonating their engines on impact. How many pilots are they willing to sacrifice? Subcommander Vrex asked in disbelief. Admiral Webb's voice answered from the communication channel. All of them, if necessary. Subcommander, you need to understand that those pilots aren't sacrificing themselves. They're ensuring their children's future safety. From their perspective, they're not dying, they're investing their lives in humanity's long-term survival. The truth of his words became evident as more and more colonial fighters threw themselves at the Vaxan fleet. These weren't desperate suicide attacks. They were carefully planned, coordinated strikes carried out by people who understood exactly what they were doing and why. This is madness. Xyloth shouted. No rational species would sacrifice so many lives for a single battle. Commander, Admiral Webb said patiently, you still don't understand. This isn't a single battle. This is humanity making a statement to every aggressive species in the galaxy. When you attack human civilians, this is what happens. Not sometimes. Not if you're unlucky. Every single time, without exception. As the battle continued, Xyloth began to notice something that chilled him even more than the destruction of his fleet. The human ships weren't just fighting with advanced technology. They were fighting with a level of coordination and strategic thinking that seemed impossible. How are they doing this, he wondered aloud. Their tactical responses are perfect. It's like they can predict our every move. His intelligence officer looked up from his console with an expression of pure bewilderment. Commander, I think they can. Our communications indicate that their artificial intelligences are running millions of tactical simulations in real time. They're not just responding to our strategies, they're anticipating them. Admiral Webb's voice cut through their discussion. Commander Xyloth, you're correct. Our AI systems have analyzed every recorded battle in Vaxan military history. We know your tactical doctrines better than you do. We've been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. The weight of those words settled over the bridge like a death shroud. The humans hadn't just been developing advanced technology during the centuries since first contact. They had been studying every potential enemy, learning from every encounter, preparing for every possible conflict. You've been planning this war for 300 years, Xyloth whispered. Not planning it, Admiral Webb corrected. Preparing for it. There's a difference. We didn't want this war, Commander. But, when your species, and others like you, made it clear that peaceful coexistence was impossible, we made sure we would be ready when the fighting started. Xyloth's fleet was now down to fewer than 50 ships, and the rate of destruction was accelerating. The human vessels had learned the defensive capabilities of every class of Vaxan ship and adapted their weapons accordingly. What had begun as a one-sided massacre was evolving into something even more terrifying, a demonstration of humanity's absolute technological superiority. Commander, his sensor officer called out urgently, we're detecting additional arrivals at the system's edge. Multiple human fleets emerging from fold space. Xyloth's remaining hope died as his tactical display showed the new arrivals. These weren't just more warships. These were massive vessels that dwarfed anything the Vaxan Empire had ever constructed. Some appeared to be mobile shipyards, others looked like planetary assault platforms, and several were so large they could only be described as flying cities.
Admiral Webb's expression remained unchanged as he watched Xyloth's reaction to the new arrivals. "Commander, what you're seeing is the Human Defense Initiative's rapid response capability.
Within 6 hours of your attack on New Terran, we can position enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system."
"That's impossible," Xyloth gasped. "No species can mobilize forces that quickly across interstellar distances." "Most species can't," Admiral Webb agreed.
"But most species don't live with the constant knowledge that they're surrounded by hostile neighbors who view them as inferior."
"Humans have spent 3 centuries building the most efficient military logistics system in the galaxy. The new human ships didn't immediately join the battle.
Instead, they took up positions throughout the star system, creating an impenetrable net that would prevent any escape."
Xyloth realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just destroying his invasion fleet.
They were making sure that no information about human capabilities would return to the Vaxan Empire. "You're going to kill everyone," he said quietly.
"Yes," Admiral Webb confirmed without emotion.
"But, understand, Commander, this choice was made when you decided to attack a human colony.
The moment your weapons fired on New Terran, every person in your fleet was already dead.
We're just working through the logistics of making that reality manifest."
Xyloth thought of Elder Corax's warnings and wished desperately that he had listened.
The old stories hadn't been exaggerated. If anything, they had understated the danger of provoking humanity's wrath.
"Admiral," Xyloth said, his voice breaking, "surely there must be some way to prevent this slaughter."
"The Empire can make reparations, establish new treaties."
"Commander," Admiral Webb replied, "the time for treaties ended when your first shot was fired.
What happens next will serve as a message to every other species that might consider human civilians to be acceptable targets." As if summoned by his words, the massive human ships began moving toward the remnants of the Vaxan fleet.
But they didn't come as attackers. Instead, they deployed what appeared to be recording devices, sensors and communication arrays that would document every moment of what came next.
"You're going to broadcast this," Xyloth realized with dawning horror. "Every species in the galaxy will see what happens when humans are threatened," Admiral Webb confirmed.
"They'll see your fleet's destruction, and they'll understand that this is the inevitable result of aggression against human civilians."
The recording devices locked onto every surviving Vaxan ship, ensuring that the final moments of the invasion fleet would be captured in perfect detail. Xyloth understood that he and his crew were about to become an object lesson for every other species that might harbor aggressive intentions toward humanity. "This will start a war that consumes the entire galaxy," he warned.
Admiral Webb's expression finally changed, showing something that might have been sadness.
"Commander, that war started 300 years ago when the galactic community decided that humans were too primitive to deserve respect.
We've just been waiting for someone to make the first move."
As the human weapons charged for their final volley, Xyloth closed his eyes and thought of Elder Corax's words.
The old alien had been right about everything.
Humanity wasn't dangerous because of their technology or their weapons. They were dangerous because they never forgot, never forgave, and never stopped preparing for the next threat. The last thing Commander Xyloth saw was the brilliant flash of human quantum weapons as they erased his flagship from existence. The last thing he heard was Admiral Webb's voice, broadcast on all frequencies for the galaxy to hear. "Let this be a lesson to any species that mistakes human compassion for human weakness.
We are capable of both infinite mercy and infinite wrath. The choice of which you experience is entirely yours."
The news of the complete annihilation of the Vaxan invasion fleet reached the imperial capital of Zithara Prime within hours, carried by automated data drones that had been programmed to activate if no communication was received from the fleet within a specified timeframe. Emperor Vorthak the Mighty sat in his crystalline throne room, his 6 eyes fixed on the holographic recordings that showed the systematic destruction of over 200 of his finest warships. "Replay the final sequence," he commanded, his voice echoing through the vast chamber.
The hologram showed Admiral Webb's human ships methodically eliminating the last remnants of Commander Xyloth's fleet.
What disturbed the Emperor most wasn't the destruction itself, but the cold efficiency with which it was carried out.
The humans hadn't fought with anger or passion.
They had simply removed a threat with the same detached professionalism one might use to exterminate dangerous pests.
Your Magnificence, General Kravox stepped forward from his position among the assembled military commanders. This recording must be some form of human propaganda. Our intelligence indicated that their technology was centuries behind our own capabilities. Emperor Vorthak's primary eyes focused on the general while his secondary eyes continued watching the replay. General, are you suggesting that our entire invasion fleet was destroyed by human propaganda?
No, Your Magnificence, Kravox replied, his confidence wavering. But surely their ships and weapons cannot be as advanced as this recording suggests.
Perhaps they used some form of deception technology, or... Silence, the Emperor commanded.
He gestured with one of his forearms, and the hologram shifted to show detailed tactical analysis of the human weapons. Our surviving probe data indicates these quantum weapons are genuine. The humans have achieved a level of technological development that our scientists claimed was theoretically impossible.
Defense Minister Kyleth, an ancient Vaxan whose scales had turned silver with age, slowly approached the throne.
Your Magnificence, if I may speak freely, this situation bears troubling similarities to historical records from the first human contact wars.
Elaborate, the Emperor ordered.
3 centuries ago, our scouts reported that humans were a primitive species armed with crude projectile weapons and chemical propulsion systems.
Our initial contact fleets were confident of easy victory.
Instead, they encountered a species that adapted and evolved their capabilities faster than we could comprehend.
The defense minister activated his own holographic display, showing ancient battle records.
By the end of the First War, humans had not only matched our technology but surpassed it in several key areas. We assumed this was their maximum potential.
Clearly, we were wrong.
Emperor Vorthak studied the historical data with growing unease. The parallels between the ancient defeats and the destruction of Xylith's fleet were undeniable. In both cases, Vaxan commanders had underestimated human capabilities and paid the ultimate price.
What are you suggesting, Defense Minister? The Emperor asked.
That we consider the possibility of a negotiated settlement, Kyleth replied carefully. The humans have demonstrated that they possess the capability to inflict devastating losses on our military forces.
Perhaps it would be wiser to seek diplomatic solutions rather than escalate this conflict.
The suggestion sent a ripple of shocked murmurs through the assembled court. The Vaxan Empire had built its reputation on military strength and unwavering aggression. The idea of negotiating with a species they had intended to conquer was almost unthinkable. General Kravox stepped forward again, his voice carrying the conviction of a career military officer. Your Magnificence, with respect to the defense minister, we cannot show weakness in response to this humiliation. The other member species of our empire are watching our response.
If we appear to retreat from conflict with humans, it will encourage rebellion throughout our territories.
And, what do you propose, General? The Emperor inquired.
Full mobilization, Kravox declared without hesitation.
We deploy the entire Imperial fleet against human space. Yes, they destroyed one battle group, but they cannot stand against the combined might of our full military force.
We have over 10,000 warships across 50 star systems. Defense Minister Kyleth's expression darkened.
General, you are proposing to escalate a conflict that has already cost us 200 ships and thousands of lives.
What makes you believe that deploying more forces will achieve different results?
Because, Kravox replied, the humans cannot possibly have enough of these quantum weapons to face our entire fleet.
Their demonstration against Xylith's force was likely using their complete arsenal.
If we attack with overwhelming numbers before they can manufacture additional weapons, we can still achieve victory.
Emperor Vorthak considered both arguments while the holographic battle replay continued in the background.
The systematic destruction of his invasion fleet was a humiliation that demanded response, but Defense Minister Kyleth's warnings about human adaptability echoed uncomfortably in his mind. General Kravox, the Emperor finally said, prepare mobilization plans for the full Imperial fleet.
However, before we commit to such action, I want complete intelligence reports on current human capabilities.
Your Magnificence, the court's intelligence director, a nervous Vaxan named Xyloth, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Our intelligence network in human space has been compromised.
Explain.
In the hours following the battle at New Terran, humans launched simultaneous raids on our intelligence gathering stations throughout their territory. Every spy, every monitoring post, every covert operation we had in place has been eliminated or captured. The Emperor's 6 eyes narrowed with fury.
You are telling me that in addition to destroying our invasion fleet, the humans have blinded our intelligence capabilities?
Yes, Your Magnificence, Xylov confirmed miserably. Furthermore, they have begun broadcasting detailed information about our previous intelligence operations to other species. Several of our allies are expressing concerns about our surveillance activities in their territories.
The implications of this revelation struck the assembled court like a physical blow. The humans hadn't simply defended themselves against a single attack.
They had launched a comprehensive counteroffensive that targeted the Empire's intelligence infrastructure across multiple star systems. This suggests extensive preparation, Defense Minister Kyleth observed quietly. The humans knew this conflict was coming and positioned assets to respond to our intelligence network. They have been planning for this war far longer than we realized. General Kravox refused to accept the growing implications of what they were learning about human capabilities. Your Magnificence, we are allowing fear to cloud our judgment. Yes, the humans have achieved some tactical successes, but they remain a single species fighting against the might of an empire that spans hundreds of worlds.
Before the Emperor could respond, alarms began echoing throughout the palace complex.
Communications Officer Zetrix rushed into the throne room, his breathing rapid and his scales pale with stress. Your Magnificence, he gasped, we are receiving priority communications from 17 different star systems.
Human fleets have appeared throughout Imperial space. The throne room fell silent as the magnitude of this announcement settled over the assembled court.
Emperor Vorthak rose from his crystalline seat, his towering form casting shadows across the chamber.
Clarify your report, he commanded.
Human warships have emerged from fold space jumps at the edge of 17 different Imperial systems, Zetrix explained, consulting his data tablet with shaking hands. They are not attacking, but they have positioned themselves to threaten our major military installations and trade routes.
How many ships? General Kravox demanded.
The reports vary, Zetrix replied, but each system reports between 50 and 200 human vessels. The total force appears to number several thousand ships.
Defense Minister Kyleth stepped forward with a grim expression.
Your Magnificence, this confirms our worst fears. The humans have not simply developed advanced weapons. They have built a military force capable of simultaneous operations across vast distances. Emperor Vorthak studied the tactical displays that were now filling the throne room with holographic representations of Imperial space. Red indicators marked the locations where human fleets had appeared, creating a pattern that showed sophisticated strategic planning. They have positioned themselves to threaten our supply lines, he observed. If they attack simultaneously, they could cripple our ability to coordinate military responses across the Empire.
Or, General Kravox suggested desperately, this is an elaborate bluff.
They may be using the same ships in multiple locations, relying on our communications delays to create the illusion of a larger force.
Communications Officer Zetrix shook his head.
Sir, we have confirmed visual identification of different ship designs and fleet compositions at each location. These are definitely separate forces. The Emperor returned to his throne, his mind working through the impossible logistics of what the humans had achieved. To position thousands of ships across 17 star systems simultaneously required planning, coordination, and resources that should have taken decades to accumulate. How long would it have taken them to build such a force, he asked his military advisors. Using conventional shipbuilding techniques, General Kravox calculated aloud, at least 50 years. But that assumes they began construction immediately after our first contact.
If they started more recently. They didn't use conventional techniques, Defense Minister Kyleth interrupted.
Your Magnificence, we need to consider the possibility that human industrial capacity far exceeds our estimates. The speed with which they have deployed these forces suggests manufacturing capabilities that dwarf our own.
As if summoned by their discussion, another communication alert echoed through the chamber.
This time, the message was being broadcast on all frequencies and was clearly intended for the Imperial leadership to receive.
The holographic display activated, showing the face of Admiral Webb from the previous battle recording.
But he was no longer aboard a warship. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be a massive industrial facility, with automated manufacturing systems visible in the background. Emperor Vorthak, Admiral Webb began without preamble, I am contacting you to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. Your invasion of New Terran has triggered a military response that your empire is not prepared to face.
The Emperor leaned forward on his throne.
Admiral Webb, you have attacked Imperial forces and threatened Imperial territory.
Explain yourself. Emperor, we have not attacked Imperial territory.
We have positioned defensive forces to protect human interests and to demonstrate that continued aggression against human colonies will result in consequences your empire cannot afford.
You threaten our supply lines and military installations, General Kravox interjected. That is an act of war. Admiral Webb's expression didn't change.
General, war was declared when your forces opened fire on New Terran civilians.
What you are experiencing now is our response to that declaration.
The industrial facility behind Admiral Webb was clearly visible, and the scale of the operation was staggering.
Automated systems were constructing what appeared to be warships at an impossible rate.
As they watched, a completed vessel moved past the viewport, adding itself to a fleet that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon.
This is impossible, Emperor Vortak whispered.
No species can manufacture military vessels at such a rate.
Emperor, Admiral Webb replied, you are correct that no single species has achieved such industrial capacity. However, you are looking at the combined manufacturing power of every human world in the galaxy. We have been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries. The revelation struck the Imperial Court like a physical blow. The humans hadn't simply developed advanced technology or built a large fleet. They had created an industrial infrastructure capable of supporting total war on a galactic scale.
What are your terms?
Defense Minister Kyleth asked, recognizing the reality of their situation before the others. Complete withdrawal of all Imperial forces from human space, Admiral Webb stated. Recognition of human territorial claims and an end to all aggressive actions against human colonies. In exchange, human forces will withdraw from Imperial space and normal trade relations can be restored. General Kravox stepped forward angrily. We will not negotiate with terrorists who threaten Imperial citizens.
General, Admiral Webb said calmly, I need to correct your misconception.
We are not threatening Imperial citizens. We are demonstrating the consequences of threatening human citizens.
There is a significant difference. Emperor Vortak studied the Admiral's expression, searching for signs of bluff or deception. Instead, he saw only the same cold professionalism that had characterized the destruction of Xylith's fleet.
And, if we refuse your terms? The Emperor asked.
Then, Admiral Webb replied, you will discover exactly how far human industrial capacity can expand in wartime conditions.
The forces you currently see represent our immediate response capability. If this conflict continues, you will face the full mobilization of human civilization. You cannot sustain a war against an empire of hundreds of worlds, General Kravox declared. Admiral Webb gestured behind him at the massive industrial facility.
General, what you are seeing is one manufacturing center on one human world. We have similar facilities on every human colony, and our industrial output doubles every 6 months during wartime production.
The mathematics of this conflict strongly favor humanity. The truth of his statement was undeniable.
The holographic displays throughout the throne room continued to show human fleets positioned across Imperial space, each one representing a level of coordination and planning that spoke to capabilities far beyond what any Vaxan leader had imagined. You have been planning this for centuries, Emperor Vortak said, the weight of recognition settling over him. Emperor, we have been preparing for this since the moment your species first classified humans as inferior. We learned from every encounter, studied every technology, and prepared for the day when peaceful coexistence would no longer be possible.
Defense Minister Kyleth stepped forward. Admiral Webb, if the Imperial government were to accept your terms, how would we implement such an agreement?
Immediate cessation of all military operations against human targets, Admiral Webb replied promptly. Withdrawal of Imperial forces from disputed territories within 30 standard days. Establishment of formal diplomatic relations and trade agreements. In exchange, human forces will withdraw from Imperial space and resume normal commercial activities.
General Kravox looked desperately at the Emperor.
Your Magnificence, surely we cannot simply surrender to human demands. The other species in our empire will see this as weakness. General, Emperor Vortak said quietly, the other species in our empire will see our survival as wisdom. He turned back to the holographic display.
Admiral Webb, the Imperial government will consider your proposal.
How long are you prepared to wait for our response?
Emperor, you have 72 hours to provide a formal answer. After that time, we will assume that diplomatic solutions are not possible and will act accordingly.
The communication ended, leaving the Imperial Court in stunned silence. The holographic displays continued to show the human fleet's position throughout Imperial space, each one a reminder of humanity's unexpected military capabilities. Emperor Vortak slowly stood from his throne, his 6 eyes surveying the assembled court. Defense Minister Kyleth, I want a complete analysis of our military options within the next 24 hours. General Kravox, prepare contingency plans for both continued conflict and negotiated settlement. As his advisors departed to carry out their orders, the Emperor remained alone in his throne room, studying the tactical displays that showed the scope of humanity's response to their invasion. Elder Korax's warnings from centuries past echoed in his mind, and, for the first time in his reign, Emperor Vortak began to understand that some battles could not be won through superior firepower alone. The humans had proven that they possessed not just advanced technology, but the industrial capacity to sustain a war that could destroy the Vaxan Empire. More troubling still, they had demonstrated a level of strategic planning and coordination that suggested they had been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. As he contemplated the impossible choice before him, Emperor Vortak realized that the true warning of the elders hadn't been about humanity's strength in battle. It had been about humanity's refusal to accept defeat, even when faced with impossible odds. And, now, as he faced the prospect of total war against a species that had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment, Emperor Vortak finally understood why the elders had warned against challenging humanity. Because when humans were threatened, they didn't just fight back. They made sure the threat could never arise again. The 72-hour deadline hung over the Vaxan Empire like a death sentence. In the Imperial Council chambers, the most powerful leaders of the Empire gathered for what many believed might be their final strategic meeting. Emperor Vortak sat at the head of the crystalline conference table, his 6 eyes studying the faces of his advisors as they presented their analysis of humanity's ultimatum. Defense Minister Kyleth activated a massive holographic display that showed the current tactical situation across Imperial space. Red indicators marked the positions of human fleets, creating a pattern that resembled a noose tightening around the Empire's most vital systems. Your Magnificence, Kyleth began, his voice heavy with the weight of his conclusions, our analysis confirms our worst fears. The human fleet positions have been chosen with perfect strategic precision. They can simultaneously attack our primary military shipyards, disrupt our major trade routes, and isolate our capital worlds from communication with outer territories. General Kravox, who had spent the past 3 days arguing for military resistance, sat slumped in his chair. His own tactical officers had presented him with battle plans that read more like obituaries than strategic options. What are our chances of military victory? Emperor Vortak asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Minimal, Kyleth admitted. Our wargame simulations show that even if we could achieve local victories against individual human fleets, their industrial capacity would allow them to replace their losses faster than we could inflict them. Meanwhile, each ship we lose represents an irreplaceable drain on our resources. Intelligence Director Zyloff leaned forward nervously. Your Magnificence, there is another factor we must consider. Our communications intercepts suggest that other species throughout the galaxy are monitoring this conflict closely. Some of our traditional enemies appear to be positioning their own fleets to take advantage of our potential weakness. The implications of this observation sent a chill through the assembled leaders. The Vaxan Empire had built its power on the fear and respect of neighboring species. If those species began to perceive the Empire as vulnerable, the current crisis could trigger a cascade of rebellions and invasions that would tear their civilization apart. Show me the human industrial data again, the Emperor commanded. The holographic display shifted to show the manufacturing facility that Admiral Webb had revealed during their communication. But intelligence analysis had revealed additional details that made the situation even more disturbing. Your Magnificence, Zyloff explained, our enhanced analysis of the human facility indicates that it is not their primary manufacturing center. Based on the ship designs we observed, this appears to be one of dozens of similar installations. The total human production capacity is. He paused, checking his notes, approximately 50 times larger than our own. Emperor Vortak's primary eyes focused on the intelligence director while his secondary eyes continued studying the tactical displays. Are you suggesting that the humans can produce 50 ships for every one we manufacture? Not exactly, Your Magnificence, Zyloff replied carefully. They can produce 50 ships in the time it takes us to produce one. Their manufacturing technology appears to use automated systems that operate continuously without the need for traditional labor forces. The throne room fell silent as the assembled leadership contemplated the mathematical impossibility of competing with such industrial capacity. General Cravox finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They could build fleets faster than we could destroy them," he said, the reality of defeat finally sinking in. "Even if our weapons were superior, which they clearly are not, we would eventually be overwhelmed by pure numbers."
Defense Minister Kyleth nodded grimly.
"General, our analysis suggests that the humans are currently operating at approximately 10% of their maximum industrial capacity. If they chose to fully mobilize their civilization for war production, they could field fleets numbering in the hundreds of thousands within a single year." Emperor Vortak rose from his seat and walked to the great windows that overlooked the imperial capital. The city stretched to the horizon, its crystalline spires reaching toward the stars that had once seemed like stepping stones to galactic dominance. Now those same stars felt like distant memories of dreams that could never be achieved. "Your Magnificence," a new voice interrupted his contemplation. Elder Corax, the ancient Vaxen who had warned against the original attack on New Terran, slowly entered the council chamber. His age-weakened form moved with difficulty, but his mind remained sharp and his voice carried the authority of lived experience. "Elder," the Emperor acknowledged.
"I assume you have heard about our current situation."
"I have," Corax confirmed, making his way to an empty seat at the council table.
"And I have come to share additional information that may influence your decision." "Speak," the Emperor commanded.
Elder Corax activated his personal holoprojector, displaying images that none of the assembled leaders had seen before. They showed the aftermath of battles from 3 centuries past, but the destruction was far more complete than any of them had imagined. "These are the true records of the original human contact wars," Corax explained. "Not the sanitized versions that were included in our official histories, but the complete documentation of what happened when our ancestors first encountered humanity." The images were devastating. They showed Vaxen colonies that had been completely sterilized, fleets that had been destroyed so thoroughly that no wreckage remained, and worlds that had been stripped of all military infrastructure with surgical precision.
"The humans did this?"
General Cravox gasped.
"Yes," Elder Corax confirmed. "But, understand, General, this was not wanton destruction. Every target was chosen with specific strategic purpose."
"The humans eliminated our ability to threaten them, but they left civilian populations and non-military infrastructure untouched." Emperor Vortak studied the images with growing understanding.
"They were sending a message."
"Precisely," Elder Corax agreed. "The humans demonstrated that they possessed the capability to completely destroy our military forces while showing restraint toward our civilian populations."
"It was a warning that we chose to ignore." Defense Minister Kyleth leaned forward.
"Elder, are you suggesting that the current human response is following the same pattern?"
"Look at their fleet positions," Corax replied, gesturing toward the tactical display.
"They could have attacked our colonies, our civilian populations, our commercial centers. Instead, they have positioned themselves to threaten only military targets."
"They are offering us the same choice our ancestors faced 300 years ago."
"Which is?" the Emperor asked.
"Accept their terms and survive," Corax said simply.
"Or continue fighting and face complete military annihilation."
The council chamber fell silent as the assembled leaders contemplated the historical parallel. The humans weren't simply responding to a single attack.
They were implementing a strategy that had been proven effective centuries ago. Communications Officer Zetrix suddenly burst into the chamber, his scales flushed with excitement and terror. "Your Magnificence, we are receiving communications from throughout the Empire. Human diplomatic envoys have arrived at 17 different Imperial worlds."
"Diplomatic envoys?" General Cravox asked with confusion.
"Yes, sir," Zetrix confirmed. "They are requesting formal meetings with planetary governors and offering detailed terms for local peace agreements." Emperor Vortak's eyes narrowed as he realized the implications. "They are offering our individual worlds the option to surrender separately." "Your Magnificence," Defense Minister Kyleth said urgently, "if our planetary governors begin accepting separate peace agreements with the humans, the Empire will fragment completely."
Elder Corax nodded approvingly. "This is exactly what they did 3 centuries ago."
"They offered individual Vaxen worlds better terms for separate surrender than they could expect as part of a unified Empire resistance."
"How many worlds accepted?" the Emperor asked. "Most of them," Corax admitted.
By the end of the war, the Central Imperial government controlled fewer than 12 star systems.
The rest had negotiated independent peace agreements with humanity. The revelation struck the assembled leadership like a physical blow. The humans weren't just threatening military defeat. They were offering to dissolve the empire itself by providing attractive alternatives to continued resistance. What were the terms they offered to individual worlds? Emperor Vorthak inquired. Elder Corax consulted his historical records.
Immediate cessation of hostilities, recognition of local autonomy, preferential trade agreements, and protection from other aggressive species.
Many worlds found these terms more attractive than continued loyalty to an empire that was clearly losing the war.
General Kravox slammed his fist on the table.
This is divide and conquer tactics. They are trying to destroy our unity.
General, Elder Corax said patiently, they are offering our people a choice between destruction and prosperity. From their perspective, it is the most humane way to end a war that we cannot win. Emperor Vorthak returned to his seat, his mind working through the impossible mathematics of their situation. The humans possessed superior technology, vastly greater industrial capacity, and a strategic doctrine that had proven effective against the Vaxan Empire in the past. More concerning, they were demonstrating the same combination of overwhelming force and political sophistication that had dismantled imperial power 3 centuries ago.
Defense Minister, the Emperor said finally, what is your recommendation? Kyleth took a deep breath before answering.
Your Magnificence, I recommend immediate acceptance of human terms. We cannot win a military confrontation, and delay will only result in the complete dissolution of the Empire as individual worlds accept separate peace agreements.
General Kravox, what is your position?
The general's shoulders sagged as he acknowledged the reality of their situation. Your Magnificence, I have sworn to serve the Empire's military interests. Those interests are best served by preserving what we can rather than losing everything in a futile gesture of defiance. Emperor Vorthak looked around the table at his advisors, seeing the same conclusion reflected in every face. The Vaxan Empire, which had once dreamed of galactic dominance, now faced the choice between negotiated surrender and complete annihilation.
Communications Officer Zetrix, the Emperor commanded, establish a direct communication link with Admiral Webb. Inform him that the Imperial government is prepared to discuss terms. As Zetrix hurried to carry out his orders, Elder Corax spoke once more. Your Magnificence, you are making the wise choice.
The humans have demonstrated that they prefer negotiated solutions to military conquest. If we approach these discussions with respect and honesty, we may find that surrender leads to a better future than continued conflict.
Emperor Vorthak nodded, though the words tasted bitter.
The mighty Vaxan Empire, which had conquered 17 star systems and dominated vast regions of space, was about to surrender to a species they had dismissed as primitive only days earlier. But, as he contemplated the alternative, the complete destruction of his civilization and the death of billions of imperial citizens, he realized that Elder Corax was right.
Sometimes wisdom meant knowing when to stop fighting.
And the time to stop fighting humanity had arrived long before the first shot was fired. The communication link with Admiral Webb was established within the hour, but this time the human appeared on screen with a completely different backdrop. Instead of a warship's bridge or an industrial facility, he stood in what appeared to be a comfortable diplomatic office, with representatives from several different species visible in the background. Emperor Vorthak, Admiral Webb began, his tone noticeably less formal than in their previous exchanges. I understand that you wish to discuss terms for ending this conflict. Admiral, the Emperor replied, noting the change in atmosphere, the Imperial government recognizes that continued resistance would be counterproductive.
We are prepared to negotiate a cessation of hostilities.
I appreciate your pragmatic approach, Admiral Webb said. However, before we discuss specific terms, I need to address a larger issue. Emperor, this conflict has highlighted a fundamental problem that extends far beyond the relationship between our two species.
Emperor Vorthak's eyes narrowed with curiosity. Explain. Admiral Webb gestured to the diverse group of beings visible behind him.
In the past 72 hours, we have received formal communications from 47 different species throughout this region of the galaxy. Many of them are currently under Imperial dominance or threat of Imperial expansion. The implications of this statement sent a chill through the assembled Vaxan leadership.
Emperor Vorthak leaned forward on his throne. What are you suggesting, Admiral?
That the Vaxan Empire's aggressive expansion has created instability throughout this entire star region, Admiral Webb replied. Species that might otherwise coexist peacefully are instead living in constant fear of imperial conquest. This creates a dangerous cycle of militarization and conflict.
Defense Minister Kyleth stepped forward. Admiral Webb, surely you cannot hold the Empire responsible for the natural competition between civilizations. Minister, Admiral Webb said, I'm not discussing natural competition.
I'm talking about systematic conquest and subjugation. Our analysis indicates that the Vaxan Empire has initiated unprovoked attacks against 31 different species over the past 2 centuries. The number struck the imperial leadership with unexpected force. They had always viewed their expansion as natural and necessary for imperial security, but Webb's stark presentation made it clear how their actions appeared to other species.
Elder Corax, who had remained silent during the initial exchange, finally spoke. Admiral, are you proposing some form of galactic tribunal to judge imperial actions?
Not at all, Admiral Webb replied. We are proposing a regional stability council that would provide mechanisms for resolving disputes without resort to military conquest. Emperor Vorthak studied the human admiral's expression, searching for signs of deception or hidden agenda. Instead, he saw the same practical efficiency that had characterized all of humanity's actions during this crisis. You are suggesting that the Empire abandon its traditional approach to territorial expansion, the Emperor observed. Emperor, I am suggesting that all species in this region abandon territorial expansion through military conquest, Admiral Webb corrected.
Humans included.
The goal is not to punish the Vaxan Empire, but to create a framework for sustainable peace. General Kravox, who had been quietly studying the tactical implications, suddenly looked up.
Admiral, such an arrangement would require enforcement mechanisms. What species would have the authority to maintain this regional stability? Admiral Webb's expression didn't change.
General, that would be determined by the member species collectively. However, I should point out that enforcement would primarily involve economic and diplomatic sanctions rather than military action.
And, if military action becomes necessary? General Kravox pressed.
Then, Admiral Webb said calmly, humanity would coordinate with other member species to address the threat. But, understand, General, the goal is to make military enforcement unnecessary through effective diplomacy and mutual economic incentives.
Emperor Vorthak began to see the larger picture that Admiral Webb was painting. The humans weren't simply seeking to defeat the Vaxan Empire. They were proposing to restructure the political dynamics of the entire region to prevent future conflicts.
Admiral, the Emperor said, this proposal would require the Empire to surrender not just our current territorial gains, but our traditional methods of ensuring security. Emperor, it would require all participating species to find new methods of ensuring security, Admiral Webb replied. Methods based on cooperation rather than conquest.
Defense Minister Kyleth activated his holoprojector to display a map of Imperial territory. Admiral Webb, such an arrangement would leave the Empire vulnerable to attack from species outside this regional council.
Minister, Admiral Webb said, that concern is precisely why we need comprehensive regional cooperation. A collective security arrangement provides better protection for all member species than individual military buildups. The logic was sound, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the Vaxan Empire had operated for centuries. Emperor Vorthak looked around the council chamber at his advisors, seeing uncertainty and concern in their expressions. What specific terms are you proposing? He asked.
Admiral Webb consulted a data tablet.
Immediate withdrawal of imperial forces from all territories acquired through conquest in the past 50 years.
Recognition of independence for species currently under imperial dominance who choose to leave the empire.
Participation in the Regional Stability Council with equal representation for all member species.
And, in return? Emperor Vorthak inquired. Guaranteed security for the Empire's core territories.
Preferential trade agreements with all member species. Access to advanced technologies through cooperative research programs. And, most importantly, an end to the cycle of militarization that has consumed resources that could be used for peaceful development. Elder Corax leaned forward with interest. Admiral, you are essentially proposing to transform this region from a collection of competing empires into a cooperative federation.
That is correct, Admiral Webb confirmed.
Historical analysis indicates that competitive military expansion inevitably leads to destructive conflicts that benefit no one. Cooperative development produces greater prosperity and security for all participants.
The scope of what Admiral Webb was proposing began to sink in among the Imperial leadership. This wasn't simply a peace treaty ending a local conflict. It was a comprehensive restructuring of galactic politics in their region. How many species have already agreed to participate in this arrangement? Emperor Vorthak asked. 43 of the 47 species we have contacted have expressed preliminary interest, Admiral Webb replied. Most of them are eager for alternatives to constant military preparation and territorial competition. General Kravox looked skeptical. Admiral, such cooperation requires a level of trust that may be difficult to achieve between species with long histories of conflict. General, you raise a valid concern, Admiral Webb acknowledged. That is why we propose implementing this arrangement gradually, with small cooperative projects that allow species to build confidence in each other's good intentions. What kind of projects? Defense Minister Kyleth inquired. Admiral Webb activated his own display, showing images of various technological and scientific endeavors. Joint research initiatives, cooperative exploration of uninhabited systems, shared infrastructure development, cultural exchange programs. Activities that provide mutual benefits while building relationships between species. Emperor Vorthak studied the proposed projects, recognizing that many of them would indeed benefit the Vaxan Empire. The advanced human technologies alone would accelerate imperial development by decades, while the proposed trade arrangements would provide access to resources and markets that military conquest had never achieved. Admiral, the Emperor said carefully, assuming the Empire were to agree to these terms, what guarantees would exist that other species would honor their commitments? The same guarantees that would ensure imperial compliance, Admiral Webb replied. Economic interdependence, shared infrastructure, and collective security arrangements. Species that violate cooperative agreements would face isolation from the benefits of participation. And the enforcement mechanisms? General Kravox asked again. Economic sanctions first, Admiral Webb explained. Diplomatic pressure second. Military intervention only as a last resort, and only with broad consensus among member species. Elder Korax nodded approvingly. This approach addresses the fundamental problem that has plagued galactic politics for millennia. Instead of competing for dominance, species would compete to be valuable cooperative partners. The discussion continued for several more hours, covering the detailed implementation of the proposed Regional Stability Council. As the negotiations progressed, Emperor Vorthak began to see that Admiral Webb's proposal offered something that military conquest never could: genuine long-term security. The Vaxan Empire's traditional approach had required constant vigilance against rebellious subjects and hostile neighbors. The proposed cooperative arrangement would transform those potential enemies into allies with shared interests in maintaining peace and prosperity. Admiral Webb, the Emperor finally said, the Imperial government is prepared to accept your proposal in principle. However, we will need time to consult with our planetary governors and military commanders before finalizing formal agreements. Of course, Admiral Webb replied. We understand that such fundamental changes require careful consideration and broad consensus. However, I should mention that several Imperial worlds have already expressed interest in immediate participation. Which worlds? Defense Minister Kyleth asked with concern. Admiral Webb displayed a list that included some of the Empire's most prosperous and strategically important territories. 17 worlds have contacted human diplomatic representatives directly. They are eager to begin cooperative programs regardless of the central government's decision. The message was clear: the Empire could participate in the new arrangements as a unified entity, or individual worlds would join independently. Either way, the transformation of regional politics would proceed. Emperor Vorthak realized that resistance was not just futile, but counterproductive. The humans had offered a path forward that preserved imperial dignity while providing genuine benefits to imperial citizens. More importantly, they had demonstrated the futility of opposing their will through military force. Admiral Webb, the Emperor said formally, the Vaxan Empire accepts your proposal for regional cooperation. We are prepared to begin immediate implementation of the withdrawal and recognition provisions. Excellent, Admiral Webb replied with what might have been the first genuine smile he had shown during their negotiations. Emperor, I believe this marks the beginning of a new era for all of our species. As the communication ended, Emperor Vorthak looked around the council chamber at his advisors. The expressions he saw were not of defeat, but of relief.
The impossible burden of maintaining military dominance over dozens of species had been lifted from their shoulders. Elder Corax spoke the words that captured what they were all thinking. "Your Magnificence, the humans have given us something that our military might never achieved."
"What is that?" the Emperor asked. "The opportunity to be genuinely secure," Corax replied.
"For the first time in centuries, the Empire will not need to fear rebellion from within or invasion from without." Over the following months, the transformation of the Vaxan Empire proceeded with remarkable smoothness.
The withdrawal from conquered territories was completed ahead of schedule, as many worlds eagerly embraced independence.
The Regional Stability Council was established with participation from 51 species, creating the largest cooperative political arrangement in galactic history. The economic benefits exceeded all projections.
Trade volumes increased dramatically as former enemies became partners.
Technological exchange accelerated development across all member species.
Cultural programs fostered understanding that made future conflicts increasingly unlikely.
Emperor Vortak, now serving as the Vaxan representative to the Regional Council, often reflected on the warnings that Elder Corax had tried to provide before their disastrous attack on New Terran. The Elders had been right to warn against challenging humanity, but not for the reasons anyone had expected. Humanity's true strength wasn't their advanced technology or their industrial capacity or even their refusal to accept defeat. Their greatest weapon was their ability to envision solutions that transformed enemies into allies. The humans had not conquered the Vaxan Empire. They had convinced the Empire to conquer itself through cooperation. And, in doing so, they had created something far more valuable than any military victory, a sustainable peace that would benefit all species for generations to come. The Elders' warnings had been proven correct, but, in a way that none of them had imagined.
Challenging humanity had indeed led to the destruction of the old Vaxan Empire.
And, from that destruction had risen something far better than what had come before.